Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Laura. Um, so, welcome everybody. I'd like to start as this is Memorial Day weekend. Of course, it's at least in my purview, it's different than any other Memorial Day weekend that I've ever experienced. I'd like to take a moment and just really honor in our hearts those people who have fought in wars and have given their lives in service to our country. And I'd also like to pay homage to all those who have died due to the coronavirus. Our death toll in the United States is about to hopefully peak at 100,000, and that's a lot of lives lost in a short period of time. So, if you'll join me in a moment of silence, and then I'll pray us in. And so, as we honor all those who have gone before us, who have served our country, or who have lost their lives unnecessarily, we turn our attention to the power and the presence of the one love, to be revealed by means of each one of us. And so, as we move forward today, that we allow ourselves to be centered in this deepest truth that we are one, and that each one of us is their brother and sister's keepers, that we hold each one in our hearts, that we carry each other in our hearts, and that we walk through whatever this portal is that we are in right now. I know that we walk through it together, strengthened by our oneness, strengthened by our divinity, strengthened by the love that we have for each other. And I know that this blesses each one. And so I simply release this, knowing that it is love that carries us forward, that takes us by the hand and leads us tenderly forward. I'm so grateful for this and so much more. And I simply release this to the power of the law, and it is the love that makes it so. And so it is. So welcome again. We are in for the month of May, we've been looking at this theme of listen to your heart. And this week we're looking at this idea of clarity, that when the traveler is ready, the path is made clear. Our book of the month that we've been working with is one of my favorite books. I draw upon it many times, and it's this gorgeous book called The Great Work of Your Life by Stephen Cope. I believe it's listed on our website if you are interested. And in this book, Stephen talks about the idea of finding a purpose, finding some meaning in our lives, and being able to understand what is being called forth from us. And he starts the book in the introduction of with a quote from Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, and the quote is, if I bring forth what is within me, it will save me. And if I fail to bring forth what is within me, it will destroy me. And I found that quote has been quite a centering place for me, because I've noticed that, as I navigate this territory of corona and isolation and quarantine, that my awareness is raised, and I'm more sensitive, and I'm and sometimes I'm really present, and sometimes I go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and I'm not present at all. So I'm really grateful that you have me show up on Sundays to be the speaker, because it requires me to stay on my growing edge. It requires me to stay awake and to stay available. Um, so Stephen, in his book, The Great Work of Your Life, he draws out the story of the Bhagavad Gita. And in that sacred text, it really is, it's an allegory. It's a story that tells a story that has meaning for all of us. And so what we know about the Gita, those of you who are familiar with it, is that it really is this wonderful philosophy about how to be in greater alignment with our humanity and our divinity, and to really get in contact with the sacred that lives within us. And so last week, when we were talking about Arjuna. He's the protagonist in the story. He's the hero that is having the experience, and it's his story that we hear. And he's a warrior. He's a great warrior, and he's called to lead a battle, and finds himself a chariot driver who, unbeknownst to him, is Krishna, who in our philosophy would represent source or spirit. And so he and Krishna go to battle, and he's ready to do his duty. And when he gets to the front lines, he looks across the field and he sees family. And he realizes that he is torn between his duty to his country and his duty to his family. So he drops to the floor of his chariot and he's paralyzed. He does not know what to do. And this is where we left off last week. And so I think it's really pertinent, because we're all finding ourselves at some level of pause, given coronavirus and isolation and quarantine and the divisiveness with instructions about what we need to do and what we shouldn't be doing. There's a lot of confusion out there, and some of you may be a little paralyzed by that. I know I have been. And so, um, like Arjuna, I can find myself on the floor of the chariot, just like I can't. I just can't. And in our story, Arjuna kind of rolls over and turns his back to Krishna, and I can't do anything. And this is where Krishna reminds him that no action has consequences too, and begins the rest of the story, where he gently leads Arjuna through the philosophy of inaction, space, in space, action, inaction, inaction, and the power of being still before taking action. And I certainly understand that. There's a lot going on in our world. There's a lot of things that are, for lack of any better eloquent way of saying this, there's a lot of things out there that are broken, right? They're just not working. And the fact is that we really don't know what we're doing. It's okay to say that out loud. We really don't know what we're doing. We have never been here before. We have never been in a global pandemic when we are all highly aware of what everybody else is doing. Just, I'm sure there's somebody you can find out what they have for breakfast this morning, or you can find out they're depressed, or you can find out they're feeling joyful, or I mean, there's just ways for us to really connect with each other deeply during this time, and more shallowly, as the case may be. And yet we're all having this experience, and we're highly aware of each other as we're having this experience. And so we're all trying to figure this out. And so, like Arjuna, who he just knows what it is his to do. He's a warrior, and he's been trained to do battle, and he comes up to the battle and he just can't. And so all his training falls aside, and he's beginning to get counseled on this idea that inaction will actually carry him to what is his to do. And so I want to share a little bit from the book. Krishna immediately points out the problem with doing nothing. and Arjuna's do-nothing strategy, this apparent path of inaction is full of action. Says Krishna, no one exists for even an instant without performing action. Arjuna's inaction, our inaction, on the floor of the chariot, the center of the intersection, is action motivated by confusion, perilous disorder. It is full of action and the consequences of action. And Arjuna does hear this, and he kind of picks himself up and he dusts himself off as he begins to ponder what is his to do. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. We're not sure what it is we need to do. We're sort of at these crossroads of what's next. We're being told by lots of people what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And I think that it sort of, when I think about this idea of acting, of inaction that actually leads to action, I want to share a passage from Science of Mind where I remember reading this many years ago. And Ernest Holmes begins to talk about inaction and the power of it. One of the ancient sayings is that to the man or woman or person, as the case may be, to the person who can perfectly practice inaction, all things are possible. This sounds like a contradiction until one penetrates its inner meaning, for it is only when one completely practices inaction that he arrives at the point of the true actor. For he then realizes that the act and the actor are one and the same, that cause and effect are the same, which is simply a different way of saying, know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. To reduce the whole thing to its simplest form, whatever one reflects into mind tends to take form. The act and the actor are one, and that is where Holmes is taking us to. And so I have a model that I want to share with you. Many of you have seen this before. It's not a perfect model, but it really helps to kind of look at the place of being powerful and yet inactive. And so you might be familiar with this. This is the Kingdoms of Consciousness model, and it really looks at the one side, the left side of the model talks about this dualistic place where we're either something's being done to us or something's being done by us. And when we look at this idea of the kingdoms of consciousness in context with this idea of inaction, in Kingdom 1, action is happening to us, and in Kingdom 2, we're the catalyst and we're the ones doing the good out in the world. But it really isn't until we drop down into Kingdom 3 that we can begin to listen to that still small voice, the voice that Krishna provides for Arjuna in our story about how he can step into being a channel for peace. And so I think in our current experiences, we're looking at the place where we're called to be. It's very tempting to jump right into Kingdom 2 and to be about the business of trying to solve problems or fix something or have a call for action for somebody else to fix something, or being angry about how somebody is trying to fix something. And so our work is to begin to make ourselves ready for the deep listening that we have to do at the level of our heart, because that's where the soul speaks to us. That's where we hear source. That's where we get true guidance. And so as we look at this idea of the story of Arjuna and how he's ready to take action, and then he surrenders to this place of inaction. And he's sort of like, now what? Well, you might remember last week that we talked a little bit about the what Stephen Cope talks about in the book of the 4 pillars of Dharma. And so last week we looked at the pillar 1 and pillar 2, which were to look to your dharma or your purpose. All dharma is your purpose. And then number 2, to do it full out. And we looked at that model of living from your genius, right? We looked at those quadrants and how we can sometimes find a comfort zone where we can play a little small or even think we're playing big, but we're still playing small because we're not operating from that place of inspired action. And that's the zone of genius. It's truly inspired action where we can drop down into our hearts. We can begin to really listen to what it is that's wanting to come forward through us. And if I think about it in science of mind speak, if you will, it might make a little more sense to you if I put it in the context of our philosophy. So if I can look at it in 3 steps, right? There's 4 steps, there's 3 steps. I hope I'm not losing you here. In Science of Mind, we talk about the first place we always have to go is within to find the answers, that the answers do not live outside of us. We may think that there's a solution outside of us. Judge Thomas Troward would call trying to fix the world outside of us working from the level of secondary cause as opposed to first cause, which is consciousness. So we go within to find the answers. We go within to get and to tap into our inner wisdom. And then the second step is to court the presence. We've been talking about that in class, and right here it absolutely makes sense. And it's that place where we begin to really allow ourselves to experience that more unitive relationship with spirit. Emmett Fox wrote a wonderful little pamphlet many years ago in the Unity movement. You may be familiar with it. It's called The Golden Key. And in it, he describes the solution to all our problems is to stop thinking about the difficulty and just think about God. To stop whatever you think is the problem or the limitation or the lack, you just stop and you think and you bring your mind and your attention to the divine. Now, I know there are a couple of meetings that I've been in last week and I'm going to be in this week, and you all have permission to remind me of this. Because I'm doing the same dance you're doing. I'm trying to look at all the circumstances, and I'm trying to really come from that place of listening to my inner wisdom. And it's not easy, especially in the midst of a global pandemic. The third step is to have faith in the law. To have faith that the law is always going to outpicture that which we embody and know. So that when we go within to find the answers, when we get that clarity, and then we court the presence, we bring our minds into a greater revelation and an understanding of the presence within that is wanting to speak through us, as us, and by us. And then to have the faith that the law will make that happen when we are grounded in our intentions, our purpose, and in presence. Then the law just has no choice. It doesn't, when we think of, you might think about the law as the, if that's a new term to you and you're thinking about a police force, that's not the kind of law we're talking about. We're really talking about a movement of intention that's kind of like the law of gravity. If I dropped a heavy object, it has to hit the ground. The gravity doesn't get to say, not today. The spiritual laws work the same way. They always respond to clarity and intention. And so we have faith in the law. And yet we live in a world of effect, right? We live in a world where there's a lot of things that appear broken, and there's a huge temptation to want to control reality because it gives us comfort. But in this time of corona, I think we have to live in the chaos and the discomfort. So I have one other piece I want to read to you, and it's from Carter Phipps's book, Evolutionaries. And he writes, perhaps the most important insight to come out of the complexity sciences is the idea that novelty is produced at the edge of chaos. That means that novelty generally doesn't appear in systems that have too much order and stability. It takes chaos, instability, and greater degrees of freedom to produce the conditions for higher forms of order and novelty to occur. A system generally has to be thrown into disequilibrium to new and higher levels of self organization to emerge. We don't need to have high degrees in physics to understand this subtle but profound truth. So we need a little chaos to really begin to step into newness. And what I know is that no matter where you are on the path of your, um, what you are to do in the world, whether you're spiritually aware, whether you're on a spiritual path, or whether you're just trying to figure out how to open up your business in this new post-pandemic world, we're all being called to something new. There's I don't think, and I'm sorry if this might be painful to hear, but I don't think we're going back to the way things were. You might be really happy about that. You might be really depressed about that. But post corona world is going to look different. And we're all in a place of high creativity. And we have opportunities to step into what we're being called forth to do. Your calling is yours and yours alone. It doesn't have to look like my calling. It doesn't have to look like your neighbor's calling. But we're all being called to something. And so my invitation to you this week is to really look at what is your calling. And don't be distracted by, if you remember last week's model of the quadrants of, you know, operating in the zone of expertise versus operating in the zone of genius. It's tempting to want to hang out in the comfort zone of your expertise. But I don't think that what's going on in the world is happening so that we can hang out in our comfort zone. I think what's happening on the planet right now is calling us to live from our genius, to live from the third kingdom, to live from our dharma. I came across a great quote from Kenny Loggins. Trust what is bringing you joy. It's taking you someplace. It's taking you someplace. So in this time of uncertainty, in this time of unknowns, what I know is that we travelers, it is time for us to prepare ourselves to be made ready for what is ours to do. And that once we get clear about that, once we know what it's ours to do, we have that sense of our intention, and we're courting the presence, the path will be made clear. It'll just open up for you. I have a prayer that I want to share with you today. It's a prayer by Tracy Brown, who was in our leadership for a very long time in Centers for Spiritual Living, the global movement. And it's a beautiful prayer, and so I'm going to invite you to take this in as your own. Wherever I am, there too is God. God, Spirit, Universe, Love, Allah, the All, the One, Life. By whatever name or title, it is infinite intelligence creating life. It creates the moon and the stars. It creates the grass and the sand. It creates the dog and the cat. It creates the mountain and the valley. It creates the heat and the cold. It creates the winter and the spring. It creates all life, all species, all forms, including all humanity. My life is the life of God expressing, expanding, and evolving through all the circumstances of my human experience. Every attribute and quality of God is in me, for I am made from it. I am made of it. I remember now that my true essential nature is the nature of God. When I resist change, Spirit gently says, "But that's what I do." When I feel excluded or judged, I hear Spirit singing in my ear, "You are my beloved." When I am exhausted and ready to give up, Spirit instructs me to follow where it leads. When I start believing no one understands, Spirit provides an angel who sees deep into my heart. When I reach the edge of my understanding, Spirit is simply trying to remind me there is more to know. When I find myself triggered by the actions of others, Spirit laughs and asks, "How are you triggering them?" When I find myself feeling helpless to change a worldly condition, Spirit is whispering, "I only need to change myself." When my old stories keep evading new circumstances, Spirit reminds me new wine can be ruined by old wineskins. When I am convinced I am right, Spirit comes in my dreams and shows me the multitudes in the beloved community. When I am tempted to walk away, Spirit asks, "What have I called you to do here? And who have I called you to be now?" When I act like it is, when I act like it is I, not the Father, that doeth the work, Spirit nudges me and reminds me to reverse that equation. And when I find myself running full force into the wall of frustration, Spirit suggests I stop and sit on the bench of peace it has provided nearby. I am not here by accident. I am right here, in this moment, in this life, in this predicament, in this world for a reason. So I sit in the presence of the divine and welcome it into my every thought, decision, and action. I choose to hear God's wisdom as I make choices. I bring Spirit's love into every relationship I have. I commit to commune with my higher self daily and allow meditation, treatment, and journaling to remind me to identify with the spiritual truth of my being. My human self is a vehicle through which my divine self expresses. Wherever I am, there too is God. I feel grateful for this reminder today. I gratefully know this is the truth every day, and for all eternity, I gratefully remember that my life is the life of God expressing, expanding, and evolving through all the circumstances of my human experience. I am grateful the guidance of Spirit is always present and available. I surrender my life and this prayer into spiritual law, always present, always available. I always work for my good and the good of all life. And so it is.